All right. And with that, welcome folks to the KCP community call, which I believe is the first one we're having this year. So are we doing still Happy New Year? Happy New Year. But with that, just the usual, I don't know, paperwork. This meeting is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which boils down to let's be excellent to each other. So let's try, let's uphold that. Not try, but let's uphold that. We have a relatively full agenda, but before we get to that, I would like to give anyone who would like to introduce themselves as a new joiner maybe the opportunity to say something if you'd be interested. Okay, I guess then let's move on to the agenda. So the first topic on the agenda is yours, Stefan. Do you want me to bring up the PR? Do you want to share it?
No need for the PR. I mean, PR is there, it implements what I wrote there. Just for awareness, this is coming. It's reviewed, might merge any day. It's part of the variant work. If you remember, we talked about that last year. There's more work coming to make service accounts global, for example, and all of that work is it uses scopes. So scopes are necessary, and we split apart scopes into its own PR, and that's what we have here. So a scope is something attached to a user, and in Cube, a user is a user name, a couple of groups, and key values, which are called extra. And extra usually it doesn't have meaning. I mean, not generic meaning, depending on cloud providers. There are other extras. We're adding one which is called scopes, and a scope is basically something which restricts the meaning of this identity to Dodge clusters, which means in the example here we have two entries. So extras is a map of slices. So there are two values here in this case. Somebody scoped this user down to cluster 1 and cluster 2, and somebody else scoped it down to cluster 2 and 3. And the logic here is that the values are ended, so they are conjunctive. And inside of each value, the comma separated list is ORed. So this means here in the case, there were two actors basically scoping, and they only overlap in cluster 2. So they agree on cluster 2, but 1 and 3, they are basically, they're not in the intersection of the scopes, the scope lists. And this means that only this identity works in cluster 2. And when I say it's working in cluster 2 means if you use this user's identity to do something like to do a request, then you are user 1 just in this one cluster 2, just in cluster 2. If you go outside, so if you use the user and access another logical cluster, you're basically anonymous and you're still authenticated, but you lose all your groups. So the idea here is, the background why we implemented that. If you do impersonation does an authorization check against the cluster, and in your logical cluster, in your workspace, you might be admin, and an admin can impersonate everybody. So I could impersonate Marvin, for example, in my workspace. Also, I'm not Marvin, obviously, but I could then act as Marvin and do whatever I like. I could even go outside of the cluster. For example, I could bind, and the binding would then be checked against Marvin, not against me. But because I'm admin, I can be Marvin, I can be NJ, anybody. So impersonation is dangerous in this sense. And what we added here are basically two things. When you impersonate, your identity you are taking on then in this moment is scoped to that cluster. So we only use one element. We don't use a slice like what you see here. We only use a simple case, but then the impersonation identity is restricted. And the other topic is about initializing workspaces. There's also impersonation happening. You remember workspaces are owned by somebody. There's annotation for the owner. And when the workspace type initializer then creates objects, impersonation happens. And we also restrict that, like we add a scope to the user while impersonating. That's all. So this is scoping. Impersonation makes use of it. There are more use cases in the future. And maybe this applies to all subject access reviews, subject rule reviews, I think it's called, right, where you get the ABAC rules, and to self-subject review, is this a word? Like the who am I command, all of those that basically give you the scoped information.
I think it's self-subject access review, something like that.
Access is for permission, that's can I in kubectl. Self-subject review, I think, is who am I? And then there is a rules review, which gives you the list of things you can do. 3 different ones.
Okay, yeah, great. I mean, this sounds pretty cool. And as you said, like it's like in the PI, it's just for impersonation, right? And we're going to extend it further later. Yes.
But you can use it. It's a generic feature. So whenever you have a user, you can attach those. And yeah. So there might be other use cases in your own code.
Is there something that this extra information is not something that you can embed it in a client certificate, right? This would, I don't know, require the front proxy
you could. No, you could.
Okay.
Can be in any authentication method where you can give extras, right? Not everywhere you can, but I think in certificates you can. So this could be part of your kube config, for example. You could have those values. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's very neat. Okay, I was about to hand to MJ, but he just left the meeting. So does anyone have a topic in the meantime, maybe? Or further comments on the scopes feature? All right. Let me see if he's going to come back. Else we will have to push this out. As a topic in between, this recent thread on the Slack channel, I don't know, it looks like a fairly, let's say, interesting problem. Oh, but okay, MJ is back, so I'll move this to any other business. Okay, MJ, so I think the floor would be yours for the permission claims topic.
Okay, that was fast in a second. Sorry, my internet got dropped somewhere. So there is a document we've been discussing for a quite long time, but current permission claims model needs some love. So we've been discussing in a Slack thread and trying to consolidate something into the document. So I think it's a bit verbose document, but the part which I think is more interesting is if you scroll to the proposed changed, and yeah, a bit below here it is basically. So we are spinning the idea that to extend an API exports and API bindings in the same way, to be able to refer to do basically 2 changes. To include verbs means you can scope permissions to the certain actions only, because currently in most cases we do, you get everything. And another one is we have an ability to refer resources by name and namespace currently. So idea would be to extend it to use it with references. So your API binding would be reference based. So instead of hard coding a secret full bar or something in API export and binding, you would create a reference to the secondary object and you specify in a JSON path where it is. Where this would come in place, if you scroll a bit down, a bit more MongoDB, here we go with green ones. So what this would allow is to provide more service type of objects, where once you bind and MongoDB API export, which gives you references to this MongoDB instance, an example, plus where the secret is. Users can start creating instances of MongoDB with their own provided like secret name and location, using some kind of one of those references we support. So in a way, it gives a dynamic way to construct objects and give access only to those objects to the via API export. And there is more details about that where we look a bit into the Kubebind land, that we need to have some validations, example, which permissions, which verbs could be claimed together and things like that. And I think it's quite, in the end, I think it's quite, we try to scope it to the smallest possible deliverable now, and we know it's not the end goal. So idea now would be that first and foremost, we need to do a POC, basically to see if the stuff works, if we didn't miss anything, if you can add verbs, if you can add references, if like everything, we didn't miss something. So some dirty proof of concept code, which we can after that split. And after that, basically split it. Something similar what Stefan did with warrants when he had a huge PR and we started splitting to the smaller ones. But in general, what people think about something like this, like, is this having model with a reference, is this something of what we would like to see? Would it work? Is there any other requirements which we didn't accounted for? I think what I'm trying to say is, we think it's a good idea. If you have other requirements or you think it doesn't work, let us know.
Stefan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to highlight two classes of requirements. Of course, this can be used if you if you invent a new API and we have a certain way to define references. You can use that feature, obviously. Like if you scroll down, I think there was an example of a reference with the object reference of Cube. I saw it somewhere. Anyway, so Cube has object reference in Core V1, right? And if you, this one exactly. If you follow that, your new API would work, right? But it could also be that there's an old API. For example, there's Cert Manager. You want to make KCP enabled. And of course, you cannot change Cert Manager. I mean, you don't want to change the API. So there are existing styles of references. And exactly, so started a doc just to learn about references in the ecosystem. And there are many, many different ways. And we have to see which we want to support.
The link above, let's scroll up. But more of this one, like for reference, you see this one.
Yeah, that's all the different kind of references we have in the ecosystem, right?
Yeah. An idea would be to support maybe not all of them, but majority of them as a ways to reference.
Make it extensible, right? If we need another type, then it should be possible.
Yeah.
The interesting bit is that some of these are kind of the same, no, just a different Go type, but they wouldn't they marshal into like the same type if you did that?
Yeah, there's some details around authorization, for example. We have to see, like some have namespaces, sometimes they are optional, sometimes they are not. Sometimes you have this reference grant thing you have just on the screen. So the details.
But for example, these are the same fields as the local object. No, wait, sorry. No, local object reference doesn't have a namespace. Sorry. Yeah.
There's an object reference, yeah. But this one, for example, doesn't have a kind. So we have to derive that somehow. And I'm not sure where this was. There was a secret local reference somewhere. If you scroll down, maybe this one, I don't remember. Basically one which defaults to secret if nothing is specified. Otherwise, you have to give a kind, something like that.
Yeah, with a key, even that. So it's like maybe you want to store the secret in a particular key and you use the secret key selector on the bottom, basically, on a document.
This one, yeah.
Yeah.
But is that the same as an object reference? Because it's a secret key.
Yeah, you could say in the virtual workspace you see just that key, for example.
Oh, okay. That then we're getting.
I mean, not necessarily here, but just an idea. So interpretation matters. The defaulting, especially, like there's no kind specified, so you make the secret visible. But the backend, there was a backend ref somewhere, then it's probably a backend, not a secret by default. So this one has a kind actually, but it's optional. Don't remember.
Yeah, this is a port field, so that's, I guess, the fun part.
Yeah, okay, maybe filtering is not such a good idea. Maybe you would see the whole object and then your controller code picks the port.
Yeah, but I think we need to start small. Let's choose the one or two and try to implement something like that. But the idea is you should be able to bring your own.
Yeah, I guess, where is it? Let me go back to this here. So I guess maybe where we can, like having a strong type would be nice, and where we can't, I don't know, you can maybe have like an untyped, like, I don't know, basically telling it like take whatever is in there.
Unstructured.
Yeah. At that point, you might need to define basically, okay, here's the name of the object, here's the namespace of the object within that unstructured form. That that's gonna be fun.
I think hard coding is fine. If we have if somebody needs another type, then you can add it. If it's extensible, we start with 2 of them or so, probably we are pretty good.
Yeah, I think we can cover like 80% of the ecosystem relatively easy.
And my expectation is you haven't shown the task, right? The MVP steps there. So there is a labeling controller today, which sees all objects and then updates labels for visibility. So probably that controller has to understand references. It's not the virtual workspace. It's this labeling controller.
Yeah.
And it gets an object and it sees, okay, there is a schema with a type, so maybe I should extract something. It sounds feasible, even if you have many different extractors possible. I mean, in code, it's all in Go code, right? It's not super flexible.
No.
Yeah, and I think we had this caveat, which example, we need to currently these references in an object should come from the user. So user creates an intent MongoDB instance, and I want secret to be named like this, like foobar. The problem is that same workspace might have multiple third parties bound to it, means multiple services operating on the same list of secrets, means same type, different secrets, same type. So we need to prevent service providers to changing these references from the virtual workspace side, basically from API export side, because by adding some different reference, you could potentially gain access to some other services secrets. So we were brainstorming a bit how you could prevent something like that, because not every secret referred in a service contract will be create secret. It might be, I'm a user, I'm providing a secret. So you service provider read the secret and do something in a cloud, example, my cloud credentials, basically. So those secrets would not be owned by the API export. We kind of shared or adopted, let's say like that. So we need to wait to, if there is a reference and the reference field is in a spec, it should be immutable to service provider side. And we thought we basically do this at wrapping mutating webhook in additional layer, which would do this checking.
I mean, this change in specific with the mutating webhook is, well, an interesting attack vector if you consider like a malicious service provider or like a malicious API export provider, right? Because, well, you can, like, part of the feature set of an API export is that you can create mutating webhooks, and that is fine so far. But if we have security features that set these boundaries on like which objects the service provider can access, then the mutating webhook basically needs to be checked for what it does, because it's on the service provider side.
And considering we told everybody on this YouTube recording how to do this, we need to implement this.
But it's in here, so in the document. So
But the idea is, like, I try to articulate as much as possible. So idea is, if you have a mutating webhook in the middle, if the change originates from the user, mutating webhooks does some things, and if the references didn't change, it's okay. Like, user changed something, it's fine. But if the request originated from the user, but mutating webhook initiated some change, which produces a delta, and delta to the reference objects, we just deny these things in the first place. And hence, this is why we need kind of strong type in the references objects too, because we need to know what is reference and what is not.
yeah. But I think for now, basically what we wanted to do is, well, work on these deliverables on this little plan. I think we probably can create some issues to basically write this down, and then we'll go from there and basically see, especially, how much can we get out of a POC and what kind of issues are we going to hit.
Yeah. And there is more, like, we just for the reference for the recording, we talked about label selectors, we talked about identity hashes and where to put these things out. So I think more things will come out of it, but to avoid analysis paralysis, this is, I think, smallest scope we can start tackling now.
Yeah.
Cool. If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know what you think and if it fits in our community Slack.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Okay, next topic on the agenda, MJ, that would be you again.
Stefan, you have to drop off, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is not directly related to KCP, but it relates a bit to that. So let me share my screen. I think this is the one. So some of us have been working on another project, which basically I would say is very close to KCP, but different, called QBind. So permission claims kind of relates to this project too, because we want QBind to support KCP and we want KCP to support QBind and Kube itself. So the idea is that QBind provides a service provider abstraction to Kube or KCP. There is existing examples how to do that via Kube, but one of the things we're trying to do is to make it KCP aware. So I think I will not have time to go into the demo fully, but idea is to approach this in a few steps. One is to merge a KCP backend, KCP compatible QBind backend. What it does the same thing what QBind does now, exports CRDs as a service provider object, but it's a KCP aware. Means it converts the queue-bind controllers to use KCP controller pattern, means be multi-cluster aware, workspace aware. So everything works as you do normally, like you bind the service, you point to the single KCP bind export, but the difference is that that export talks to the multiple workspaces and reconciles objects from there. So that would be step one to show how it can be done. Step two would be to extend KCP so queue-bind could understand API bindings as resources, as a schema. Currently, queue-bind operates on CRD objects. So like it reads CRD object and exports it as a service provider object. And there is no such directly thing as CRDs in a KCP land. We get API objects from API bindings. This means we're going to need to expose somehow to enable queue-bind to get schema from API binding or schema used in API binding. And I think this is where scoping might come into picture too a bit, like how do we expose schemas only to the consumers in the certain workspaces? So that, yeah, go ahead.
That's an issue which I had in general as well, where as a consumer or someone using a workspace, I don't have any insights into which API bindings are available or what the schemas would be of resources that I'm not actively consuming. So something like a catalog, I know there was a project in the KCP dev before, and maybe some API docs would be a good addition, but I didn't know yet where to address this, and I understand that maybe you don't want everyone to see everything. So
Stefan?
Yeah, I have to leave in a minute, but Hannes, for your topic, this is intentional outside of the scope of core. So we need something on top, something like a catalog. So it's totally fine to think about that, to talk about that. It's not really the purpose of the exports. You don't have to see exports to know what you have, or what you can bind. Basically, that's the idea, or it should be the goal. So it would be something external. MJ, about your API binding schema topic, if I remember right, the backend was built in a way, or the protocol of the backend, that the backend provides the schema in API service export, something like that. Like there's a separate object, right?
Yeah.
So the queue-bind agent, it as a connector, does not read CRDs. That's correct, right? It only reads this special object. So
I think it's something raw, something, yeah.
Yeah, but it knows its queue-bind API service export object. Like it reads that. It never reads the CRD. So I have to talk about that, but I don't think that we need support for bindings in the connector. I hope not.
No. I think it's more from the...
In the backend, yes, for sure.
Yeah, in the backend. Connector, no.
Yeah, and there must be a discussion. I mean, the backend was always an example called like that. So maybe it's time to factor that in a better way, that we can share code and have one part which is aware of bindings, another one which is not.
Yeah. So that's one basically. Another one, but if we enable the protocol to understand KCP, we allow to share API bindings outside KCP. So you could create this relationship where you have a workspace which represents potentially your physical cluster outside. So any service providers you bound to this workspace, you kind of sync them down to your physical cluster. So that's currently what Kubebind does, but that's with Kubernetes itself, like kube to kube, service provider, kube cluster to consumer. So once we do this, we could implement a KCP to consumer relationship. And third step, like, okay, we need to extend KCP API binding permission claims. So this is the topic which we talked before, where you basically enable more granular control of what you can do via API, via export, via claim, basically. And the last one is, if you want to start connecting KCP clusters to other KCP clusters. So we started, I think, talking about this more like a republishing reseller pattern, where you have an API binding on one KCP, which becomes basically API export on the another KCP instance. So like this bridge of two instances, we would need to have a KCP aware connector, but that's last one. So I think for now, basically, I will share a separate, maybe a small recording of currently KCP aware Kubebind backend, because it's a big change. I will share a separate video, which we can either publish on YouTube or just in a chat. And we will need to think how we tackle these things together. I think it's more for awareness for people that some of us been working in this project a bit. But this means that you might start hearing more of the Kubebind being mentioned in the like KCP calls, because we want to make sure that these two projects talk together.
And the question that I had was, in general, where should like a KCP aware Kubebind backend live? Like this is like a draft PR in the Kubebind repo, but I was wondering, isn't that something that KCP should host in the repo eventually? Like it's something.
I don't know. Okay. It was easier because now it refers the same code base. Like it's easier to do that. I think once we stabilize the APIs, we agree on everything. Yes. There is another question, I think, which Stefan alluded before leaving, is we call these things now examples. Like if you go to Contrib, you will find back an example. It's in no way ready to be consumed. It's something like sample controller in a kube upstream, where you take this and implement your own. So maybe at some point we need to say, okay, let's publish two official backends, one kube, one KCP, wrap it with a nice UI instead of this HTML static content, and publish them even in the corresponding repository. I don't know. Something what people could pick up off the shelf and start using as a service provider or consumer, instead of here's the example and go build your own stuff.
Yeah. But I absolutely. But I think like the Kubebind/Kubebind repo is basically, the like protocol and an example backend, and at least from my feeling, it should be or like in this case, like KCP should host like a proper backend implementation. But yeah, for the like prototype, obviously it doesn't matter.
I mean, the question is, do we just do a backend implementation for KCP, or also a generic one which works with any kind of Kubernetes? Because that was Kubebind was built in the way that it's explicitly like generic, requiring. But I think we also need to think where future-wise does it make sense to have it like outside of the KCP repository, or the KCP orga in general Kubebind, or can we merge this under, even if it's not only for KCP, under the KCP umbrella, just also for government reasons?
I mean, I think ideally, maybe, there have been Kubebind adopters in the past. If we can kind of like reunite them, I would say maybe KubeBind also has a chance as a sandbox project as well, but a separate one.
And the question is, do we really want to have this? Because it's double the effort of doing the whole dance with the Linux Foundation to maintain.
I will put a break on this, and I think maybe let's discuss this asynchronous in a smaller group. Because,
Yeah, I mean, let's discuss it dedicated also with Stefan is there, where and how,
yes,
what.
No.
But yeah,
it's like I think there is a good reasons on both sides, like good reasons from paperwork side. At the same time, keeping it independent might be more appealing for some adopters than trying to put it under KCP umbrella. So it's I think we really need to consider it in a.
yeah. I mean, there are pros and cons. Like if you put it
Yeah.
under the KCP, even if it has a neutral backend or a Cube only backend, people will think, okay, it's only work with KCP, which is
No.
not the intention and not the case. So I don't say we should, but
Yeah.
we should think about where it should live, or if we leave it like this, or having it as a dedicated project.
Yeah, but I think the final goal is still to have official backends written, which could do things basically, which people could pick it up and use it. So I had a demo prepared for this, but let's keep it that instead. I will gonna try to record it separately because it's not much of the show. So
Okay, cool. I mean, we can upload that to YouTube. That would be great.
Yeah.
Then. Okay. Trying to put a lid on that. Wait, how can I bring my screen to the front? All right, so we don't have any other topics on the agenda. I wanted to talk about this thread on the KCP dev channel about the conflicting city types, but I don't think we have the amount of people to have a good discussion about this. So I would say we keep this async on the thread. With that being said, do we have any other business? Because now would be the time for an open floor. If we have anything else to discuss, any questions, now we can talk about it. Okay, does not seem to be the case. Then I would say we can wrap up this meeting. Thank you very much for attending. And with that, have a great Thursday afternoon, evening, Friday morning, wherever you are. So have a good one.
cool. Thank you very much.
Talk to you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.